Rick, you're very welcome to Talk TV. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. How are you?
Very well, thanks. Thanks for having us, Peter.
Rick, what do you make of all this? It's very, very serious.
Well, I mean, it is very serious, actually. Mind you, we must be very open with you. These are allegations as such at the moment.
Which he denies. You're absolutely right to say that, yep.
Yeah, and, it is very serious, but I do stress the point again, these are allegations. There is any hardcore proof. He hasn't been prosecuted or anything like that. But coming from a PR perspective, this is messy. This is messy. As you quite rightfully mentioned, some of his previous behaviour from before, he admits to being quite promiscuous with what happened at Radio 2 and the comments he made on the show with Jonathan Ross and things like that. The optics, they don't look good. So that's one. Another thing, there's never a good time for stuff like this to happen. There never is. But, with the backdrop of Louis Rubablis going through the mangle at the moment, Andrew Tate being very much in the news, this male predatory behaviour, I heard you use the word predatory, this does not look good. Number two, the who knew when and when it happened.
Well, that's a massive, and there are many allegations, including in The Sun. Execs turned blind eye. Brand's alleged predatory behaviour towards women was an open secret among senior TV and radio executives, the probe claims. And of course, there is a difference between consensual relationships and what Russell Brand is accused of and denies. And actually, there are questions as well, Rick, about why now. And certainly, Russell Brand has gone from being a pretty, controversial and near the knuckle and saying things that some people find pretty abhorrent. Certainly the Andrew Sachs stuff I thought was awful. But even some of his comedy wouldn't be things that I would laugh at personally. But many people did, and he was incredibly popular. But there are people, including on text here. I'm just going to read out a couple of these texts. Dawn in Chelmsford says, "Hi Peter, the allegations against Brand just demonstrates the power that some famous rich men have over women, sadly a common theme." Well, I should say he denies the allegations, Dawn, but that's a fair point. But Stephen Stoke makes an interesting point here. Russell Brand has recently gone from 1 million to 6.5 million YouTube followers in less than 2 years. That's why this has all come out, says Stephen Stoke. Useful idiots like you, he's referring to me, who are in bed with politicians are now doing their work. They're out to get him. It's obvious to sensible people, but you do your work, says Steve. There will be people who believe that that's the case, and this is happening now simply because Russell Brand is a sort of counter-mainstream media figure. He's a counter-political figure. He doesn't like Westminster. He would see it as calling out a lot of the stuff that goes on. If these allegations are true, that's incredibly serious. But also, it's not as if this is, I'm not comparing Russell Brand to Jimmy Savile, they're two very, very different people, but the kind of allegations that have come out about many people through U-Tree, through all these kind of allegations, it's often people who are either dead or older or not necessarily making points now about politics, and some people are saying this could be conspiracy. What do you think of that, Rick?
Well, why now? That's a brilliant question. I think, look, if this is a conspiracy, you're right. He is an activist on YouTube. He has a gazillion followers, and he has been calling out the government. And if this is a dirty tricks campaign, this is something that would bring him down. But, I think we need to look at the bigger picture here. Male predatory behavior, especially in positions of power, having worked in the media as well, in quite high profile jobs at Radio 2, Channel 4, having a string of shows as well that a lot of people went to. I think there's a bigger picture to be seen here. We've had the recent scandals with Philip Schofield and things like that. So what more is there underneath the closet? Not just Russell Brand, but other high-profile figures. If Russell Brand was an activist, would this have happened? I think for the safety of society, it is good that this has come out.
Well, it's interesting to Steve's point, all I would say is if this is a campaign, if this is a kind of, mainstream media establishment stitch-up of Russell Brand, there's a heck of a lot of coordination here. There's a lot of, a conspiracy takes a lot of people to act in a certain way. I heard from those women last night on Dispatches, and I actually want to just play a little clip of Dispatches now, just to get a flavour of it for people who haven't seen it or heard it, what it is. Let's just play 30 seconds from the Channel 4 Dispatches documentary last night.
I distinctly remember getting phone calls from women in tears the next day saying that they'd met up with Russell. They were mainly upset because they just felt used. You know, he promised he'd call me, he said he'd speak to me again, and I've not heard from him. That said, you know, I don't know what went on once they left the studio. It felt like we were essentially taking lambs into slaughter. We are basically acting like pimps to Russell Brand's needs.
So that was a clip from Dispatches, of course, the Sunday Times and the Times, which are also owned by News UK, which is the organisation that owns talkTV. Should make that absolutely clear, totally clear. That was broadcast last night on Dispatches on Channel 4. And Rick, it is, as you say, not just about Russell Brand necessarily, but actually there's a theme that just comes over and over again in all of these kind of allegations against whether it's the police, the church, politicians, whoever. It's not just the people allegedly doing these things, it's the management and the system that allows them to do it and to get away with it. I mean, those were people who were working in television. It wasn't part of their job to get phone numbers from young people so they could then go on dates or sleep with Russell Brand or whatever they're accused of, which he denies, as I say again. I mean, this kind of world that he inhabited, at the very least, was a world where he was a very powerful person who could allegedly ask people, unless they're all lying, every single person that Dispatches documentary is lying, to you know, get people to come to him to have sex with him and so on. I mean, that kind of power of a celebrity. And some people, I watched the documentary, and some older executives were accused of saying, oh, boys will be boys and it's all consensual, not to worry about it. But there is definitely a power dynamic there, isn't there, in these kind of presenters who are very, very powerful people versus not just the workers, who the people behind the scenes who are often less powerful, but also audience members who he was allegedly asking for sex.
Yes, absolutely. And I think he was playing on his fame and people's vulnerability about this as well. I think with the power dynamic that he has here, with this platform that he was on, or with this type of fame, comes a certain amount of responsibility with how you conduct yourself as well. And, you know, as humans, we may all be tempted into temptation to do these types of things. But I think, you know, there is going to be a shift in people who are very famous, who abuse their situations. That's basically what's happened. He's been able to abuse, if this has happened, these are allegations, I might add, but if these allegations do stand to be true, I think there are people in power or have a lot of influence on other people, as we have seen recently in the last few months with other broadcasters, that I think with this amount of fame comes a fair bit of responsibility as well.
From Channel 4's perspective, Rick, what will they be thinking today in terms of the PR around this? I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that you have someone who was really made, he was on Radio 2 as well, he was on lots of other outlets, he was on MTV, and he's now got his own channels and so on. But really, Channel 4 kind of made him, didn't they? It was those shows, it was the comedy shows, it was the Big Brother stuff that he did that really made him a star. And now they're kind of reporting on themselves, actually. And there was this kind of weird thing within the Dispatches documentary last night. I should say, I have another 20 minutes to go on their equivalent of the iPlayer, but I've watched most of it. And it essentially said, you know, we asked Channel 4 for a statement, and they said this, that, and the other. And it's kind of weird that it's the organisation reporting on itself, as the BBC has on Jimmy Savile after things were suppressed and so on. I mean, it's tricky for Channel 4, isn't it? It doesn't make them look good at all.
No, it doesn't. And I think broadcasters, like you mentioned, the BBC and Channel 4, you know, they need to come out with this and take the bull by the horns, because what's ultimately going to happen is credibility. That's what Channel 4 needs to keep, or people will tend to go elsewhere. As you may have seen on the TV awards that were on a couple of weeks ago, you know, there were people booing this morning because of the way the organisers and the producers of This Morning conducting themselves, knowing fully well what was going on in the background and trying to, for wanting a better metaphor, you know, sweep it under the carpet. You know, they really got burnt for this. And I think Channel 4, to hold its credibility, they need to be charging from the front with this. And they, you know, from a PR perspective, they need to distance themselves from this, and they need to be seen that they have, in principle, been doing the right thing by this, and they have come out. If, you know, the public or people even get a sniff that they decided to cover this up or sweep this underneath the carpet.
Yeah.
That's Channel 4's credibility, as would be with any.
And has kind of been the case with the BBC over Savile and various other people as well.